Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the 832 podcast. And today we're going to do the second episode in our series on the parables of Jesus. And today we're going to go over the parable of the wheat and the weeds.
This one's fairly straightforward. It's not that hard to figure out, in my opinion. That being said,
Jesus does explain it anyways.
So it's probably one I should take another look at. It's in Matthew chapter 13, verse 24 through 30 is this specific parable. The explanation comes kind of later.
Yeah, he does another parable and then he explains the parable of the wheat and the weeds, but we'll skip over that and then go straight back into his explanation.
I'll go ahead and read it. He put another parable before them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master came to the house and said to him, 'Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds?' He said to them, 'An enemy has done this.' So the servants said to him, 'Then do you want us to go and gather them?' But he said, 'No, lest in gathering the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first, and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn.'" So, I mean, yeah, he'll explain this later, but clearly, the wheat is, good Christians. The weeds are not. And the enemy sows weeds right in with the good Christians, and we won't really know which is which until
it's time to. Well, they did know, but they didn't.
Burn.
Well, they did know though. They did know which were weeds and which were wheat, but they didn't upend them.
Generally speaking, when servants are talking to the master in parables, it's angels.
Right.
Generally speaking. So the angels know. God knows. I don't think the wheat and the weeds, obviously.
Right, the wheat and the weeds wouldn't know which one is which, but okay. See, that makes a lot more sense. Like, it's a little bit deeper than surface level.
Right. Yeah, so that's how that goes. And it's interesting that God's like, "No, I don't want you to get the weeds now. We'll take care of that at harvest time so we can separate them out." So this is interesting. It would do more harm than good to get all the weeds out of the crop.
Right.
Before it's time for harvest. And this actually kind of falls into how our justice system works in a weird way. He would rather a weed keep growing than risk uprooting a good plant, which is similar to, we would rather let a guilty man go free than convict an innocent man.
Right.
So that's kind of how it applies, of course.
Right. Do not uproot the weed at the expense of the good.
Right.
Alrighty.
And then the parable of the weeds explained.
Yeah, I'll read that one. This is Matthew chapter 13, verses 36 to 43. Jesus interprets the wheat and the weeds. Then he dismissed the crowds and went into the house. His disciples approached him and said, "Explain the parable of the weeds in the field to us." He replied, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. Therefore, just as the weeds are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of our age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather from his kingdom everything that causes sin and those guilty of lawlessness. They will throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the Father's kingdom. Anyone who has ears should listen."
So yeah, just like I said, if the reapers are the angels.
Right. Right, the harvesters, all that.
Right. So, yep. Sons of the evil one. Grown up right alongside.
Right. And so, I guess let's talk a little bit about sons of the evil one. And like, it's easy to it's it's not the sons of God, but like, what does that look like? You said earlier, bad Christians.
I said that, but since the field is the world,
Mm-hmm.
then the weeds are just not Christians. But since they're growing up right next to the wheat, well, could be Christians among them as well. There certainly are. That's the problem. Is it doesn't matter what you call yourself. It's what's actually true about you.
Right.
And so,
Like, the whole idea is like, they will know we are Christians by our love and the fruits of the Spirit and stuff.
right,
Doesn't matter if you say you're a Christian if you're, if you don't show anything.
right, and we're really it's like we can't say definitively that you're not, but it's like, what do we have to go on?
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're trying here, we really are, and what do we have to base our trust? Trust but verify.
Another thing that I find interesting is like the weeds and the wheat are growing, and this is all, the field is the world. So,
Mm-hmm.
The wheat is, living in the world, but is not, uh, of the world. Dang it, living in the world, but not of the world, because the wheat's growing alongside the weeds, but they're not becoming weeds.
Right. And Jesus sowed the wheat, whereas the enemy sowed the weeds.
Right.
So it's all about, and I guess you could even say that people are the soil, and the plant that comes up is our relationship with Christ. I mean, if you had to,
Well, that was definitely what was being taught in the sower, or the parable of the sower,
right,
but this, it's like more like I guess the relationship between Christians and non-Christians, or what the end state for non-Christians is what this is teaching, more so than like
there are consequences to not being, what the master sowed.
right.
I mean, that is the main thing. That's true, and I think that also kind of helps. And in the question of sorrow, you could actually bring up this parable. How can a good God allow suffering?
Hmm.
allow evil people to be around. And you look at, you just show them this parable.
Right. Yeah, I haven't thought about that, but
I
you're
didn't until like just now.
right. It's like why would he allow horrible things to happen? Because if he upends that, it could do more damage to the good around it or whatever.
Right.
Like in the wake of a hurricane, if he didn't let the hurricane happen, he wouldn't have been able to, like, there wouldn't be that opportunity for others to serve the community. Like when a hurricane happens, community is destroyed, people come in and try and help said community. If the hurricane didn't happen, there wouldn't have been that opportunity to serve others and to maybe even glorify God in that endeavor.
Ah,
Or is that not a good example?
that's not at all a good example. Only because this is about
This is about
people's choices
people's choices.
and
Right.
people. Like, why does God allow bad people to exist? This
Right.
is why.
Right. My head went to a different kind of sorrow, a
Yeah.
different kind of evil.
And the the broken world evil gives us an opportunity to show God's glory or give God glory, but we don't rejoice in the tragedy. We rejoice in the opportunity.
Right, which is what I was saying.
Right,
It's not
but
like, yay, a hurricane. It's like, yay, I can serve people.
right, but at the same time, you're going to be unhappy that the hurricane affected people in such
Right.
a profound and destructive way.
Yeah.
So that's that's a way to use um, grace to counter sorrow. But in this case, we're talking about people. Some weeds are incredibly gnarly, and some weeds are just whatever. But
That is a fact.
the
Like, pulling weeds out there.
right.
It's like some are like, okay, whatever. And then there are some that are like,
Dang, that one had thorns.
that one was practically a tree.
I think that one growled at me.
I think that one growled at me. Yeah. Yeah, that's a fact.
So, and an interesting fact is that when you spray stuff on, that'll kill weeds but not nice things, or it'll kill weeds but not grass. The problem is, if you spray too much of that, or you spray it while it's raining, it can run off and hurt plants in other places. Because it may not kill grass, but it'll could kill flowers, or could kill fruit trees, or could kill wheat.
Right.
And so that's why.
Right, and in this scenario, it's like it was better to just let the the weeds grow than to spray it.
So justice is coming, but not until the harvest is ready.
Right.
Not until the harvester is ready. And that's really, how can the answer to how can God allow evil? It's like, well, he's only going to tolerate it for a time.
Right.
And then when the time has passed for that evil, there will come a reckoning.
Right.
Where it is punished.
Yeah. I just realized like this is a bit like in all the like peripheral reading videos, whatever, about the question of evil people.
Right.
It's like this parable just does not come up.
That is odd.
Now maybe like either people who are like way above us have like really dissected it. It's like, okay, that's not necessarily what it means, but like,
well, no, because
how can it not mean that?
No one can overrule Jesus on what it means, and that's what he said it means.
Yeah, you're right. I don't know. It's just really strange to me that this has never come up. Like, why doesn't anyone? Well, okay,
Well,
they also have to answer it in Never mind. I was about to say they have to answer it sometimes in a uh, not purely Christian way. Like if you're as in like okay, atheist versus deist. But we're never mind. That was stupid.
the real problem that comes up is when you're answering these questions. First off, people don't know the Bible,
Right.
and Christians are more and more not given the opportunity to turn. Okay, if you're having a conversation with somebody who is genuinely wanting to know the answer, what about suffering? Honestly, that question very rarely comes from an honest source who's having a discussion in good faith.
Right.
And unless you're having this discussion in a public forum, you should just say, you know what, I don't think we're ready to have this talk. That's a nice way to say I'm not going to cast my pearls before you, you swine. Well,
Very tactful.
Well, I mean, yeah, well, because they ask you that question to trip you up, and it's really not a question that has an acceptable answer that doesn't require faith.
Right.
It's not a question that you can just go, here's the answer, and everybody who hears it's going to be like, oh, okay, good.
Right.
They're going to be like, well, no, I'm not. The whole reason I asked that question is because there's so much suffering that there can't be a God. That's why I asked that question. I was hoping you'd come to that realization on your own.
Right. But but for us to say it's like, yeah, it sucks, and he only tolerates it for a time. When the time's up, it's gonna there will be a reckoning, and that follows through with the vengeance is not mine
Right.
idea in Christianity.
But the to take that to the next level. So if they're genuinely curious, it's like, well, and do you accept the Bible's the source of my spiritual faith, and so I'm going to use the Bible to answer that question. They're like, oh yeah, okay.
Right.
And I find a lot of times, well, the Bible has not been discredited in the minds of Christians for the most part. Actually, more and more it is. There are more and more Christians who are like, no, the Bible is just a lot of great teachings and stories. It's not the inspired word of God. It's like, but it's the only source we can have to know about God and who Jesus was. Well, it's not the only one. There's others, like what? Like the Vedas? Like the Quran?
Right. We cannot look for those holy books for our God.
And so,
Like,
there are plenty of people who claim to be Christians who are going to say that. The instant someone, I'll say it. The instant someone claims that in front of me, I will refuse to believe their opinion on anything Christian. They have lost the right to have any say on how my Christianity works.
right, because
well, they have just.
This is the only
This
thing.
is it, right?
Like all other books that like all other like apologetic books, whatever. If they're any good, they come from this.
Right, and they established the foundation of that. So people don't want to hear it from the Bible, and what you can say is, if you don't want me to tell you how my belief just deals with suffering without letting me use the Bible, then we're not having this discussion in good faith. So we're not ready to have this discussion.
Right. Anyways, that was a bit of a tangent.
I mean, it isn't.
Right. It's like.
It comes from, it's like, why doesn't anybody use this? Well, because they don't let us use the Bible. But what we need to understand more and more is that anybody who doesn't let us use the Bible is not having the discussion in good faith.
Right. Because we're using our, spiritual text to help other people understand our spiritual belief.
Right. It's like, if that's off limits, then you're really just trying to cut my legs out from under me, and you really don't.
Right. It's like if a Darwinist, like, evolutionary theory, if they can't reference Darwin's book. They rarely do. But Darwin's book, Evolution, if it's like, no, you can't use that. Why not? It's like the whole, why can't I use my Bible?
Well, I mean, when it comes to that, you go far enough back, and it's all based on faith and speculation. No matter how you want to discuss how it got here, um, eventually you go far enough back, and it's all faith and speculation.
Right.
Like even towards like major branches of species. At that point, it's just speculation because nobody's ever observed or recreated a major branch of a species.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, given enough time, you might be able to get two populations that can't or won't mate with one another, but you'll never be able to, you know, find that place where a lizard became a rat,
Right.
or whatever the branches are. I don't know.
Right. Or a fish became an alligator, or a fish became whatever.
Right. So all that,
Faith and speculation. But yeah.
Down the rabbit hole we go.
Yeah. That's just a. But yeah, it all kind of like what kicked off this conversation. It really is profound to me how we don't, like, in general, use the wheat and the weeds to explain the parable of the problem of evil people.
Right.
Because this is the perfect answer for problem of evil people. Just evil as in like bad things that happen.
Right.
It's like that's a different problem, but which we've covered
Right.
earlier and explained earlier why that's a different problem.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, so it's all very interesting. And that's I mean, but there's not much more to say about it. I'm kind of, I guess, from the time frame. Jesus is telling a very like normal story that people would just be like, well, that's an odd story. Yeah, that makes sense that you would do it that way. Or maybe it didn't make any sense that the farmer wouldn't insist that the weeds get pulled immediately. But either way, I guess people at the time probably were kind of scratching their heads after they heard that story. They're like, why didn't he just get the weeds immediately? You lose a little wheat, whatever. You know?
Right, but if the plan is to get all the wheat.
Right. No. Right. I'm just trying to think of why this needed an explanation at the time. It's an interesting thought experiment.
Right, yeah.
Because right now, but we've got, years of context growing up in the church, hearing preaching and things like that, where
it's like this just makes intuitive sense.
Right.
To us.
It's like, well, obviously he's talking about,
Yeah.
But clearly it wasn't obvious then because he had to explain it later.
To the disciples.
And I'm speaking from a place accepting that I grew up in the church.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not in any way trying to claim supremacy over the disciples who were in a completely different time. You can't apply the same things.
Right.
But it is kind of interesting how over the years, and it's just become such, I guess, a commonplace story that people don't really. No, you know what? This is not a commonplace story. Everybody always talks about the good soils, the different soils. No one ever talks about this one. You don't hear anybody preach on this one. And you can kind of see why, because, we went on a lot of rabbit holes, and we've only been talking for about 24 minutes.
And then, like...
Yeah. And so it's a simple but important lesson. The wheat matters to the master.
Right. Yeah, the wheat, like getting all the wheat is more important to the master than like killing weeds as they come.
Right. And it's all just going to happen in one fell swoop one day.
Right.
And no, I'm glad I'm gonna be one of the other side.
Right. You're
The
wheat.
yeah, because I don't like the whole fiery furnace wailing gnashing of teeth thing. It doesn't sound
Right.
like any fun.
Right.
So
I heard this one time and it's really stuck with me with the question of hell.
uh-huh.
So that it's God. I think I might have actually heard it from you the first time, but the concept of hell is actually it's God respecting your decision. If you don't want to be with Him, He's going to send you to the one place He's not, which happens to suck. Because there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. So
Right.
it's an interesting concept, but that's something that gets brought up with me on occasion.
Um, it might even be fair to say that there won't be anybody in hell who would have rather been in heaven with God. Like that's an entirely possible scenario. I mean, they would probably rather not be suffering. Here's a messed up example from my life. Um, so when my second marriage ended, I was broke, I was miserable, I was lonely, and I didn't care as long as it meant I didn't have to go back to her. So I can kind of relate. You know, it's like this sucks, but I would rather be here than there with them. I can't imagine somebody saying that about God, but I can imagine saying it about someone.
Right.
So, as much as this sucks, it's better than there with that person.
Right, but in that scenario, it's like that. Well, and like people do hate God.
Yeah,
A lot like I've heard this like this idea where it's like with atheists, it's like it's not that you don't believe God exists, it's that you hate him. If you
right,
don't believe in that something exists, why do you argue so hard that it doesn't? I don't necessarily believe unicorns exist, so I don't argue that unicorns don't exist
right.
in the horse with a horn.
No, that's exactly it. Like, there's nothing I think doesn't exist, like genuinely think doesn't exist, that I'm gonna fight to prove does not exist.
Hmm.
Well, with one or two notable exceptions that we'll leave out. But either way, there are
Yeah.
certain things that I believe are impossible that I will argue tooth and nail are impossible, regardless of how much someone tells me that they are possible.
Ah, okay.
But I will not try and prove the existence of something I don't believe exists.
Right.
And really, on that note,
Hmm.
this is one of those prayer. This is one of those parables that has become simple over time, but was apparently difficult enough at the time that Jesus felt he needed to explain it to
Right.
his disciples afterwards. So
Hmm.
here we are.
So yeah, and how we understand it now is that the good and the bad will be harvested,
And
when they are harvested, and the good
we'll
will,
come into the master's barn, and the bad will be thrown in the fire.
yep, that evil and evil people, I suppose.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
all
evil people, specifically evil people,
specifically evil people.
will be tolerated until they aren't.
Right. And then,
So,
woo! Here we go. Um, so yeah, I guess on that we'll close with word of prayer and get on with our lives. Dear God, your word is amazing, and your name is holy, and I just praise you. Give glory to both, Lord. I ask that you help this podcast and Ethan and I in our personal lives grow your kingdom, and let your will be done here as it is in heaven. And ask that you give us what we need to grow your kingdom, and forgive us when we fall short, and help us to forgive, or to the same extent that we forgive those who wrong us. Keep temptation far away from us, and deliver us from that old devil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. In Jesus' name, amen.